we have Paddy Mackle. Paddy is from the Northern Ireland Public Service Association. And Paddy's going to give a presentation, a case study on the water coalition that communities use to defeat water charges and privatisation in the north of Ireland. So give Paddy a big welcome. And straight after Paddy, without further interruption from me, we will have Steve Nolan from Trademark Belfast. So Steve, you want to come up and wait up here? Steve Nolan from Trademark Belfast. And Steve will do a presentation on the democratisation of knowledge and the political economy. Paddy, thanks very much. Paddy, walk away there.
Cheers. Paddy Mackle, Belfast Trades Council, and also NIPSA. Bring you fraternal greetings from Belfast and happy International Workers' Day. My contribution today will focus on the campaign north of the border, which commenced in 2006, was largely successful at the time, but we're still mindful that the issue could reignite at any point. If it does, I can assure you we're ready for it. We're galvanising our resolve and encouraged by what the Right2Water campaign here in the Republic has achieved to date. My wife and I joined tens of thousands of protesters in December last year in Dublin, and again when we marched to GPO for a massive rally on the 21st of March this year. It was such a fantastic feeling to march and protest in solidarity with citizens in this jurisdiction who are facing the same neoliberal attack on public services. The stance you're taking is resonating around the world with ordinary people who are being abused by an economic system and a capitalist class which cares nothing for workers and their families who are struggling because of the gambling habits of speculators. I'm going to cover how the campaign started, who was supportive then, who's supportive now, what we did at the time, and then finally to consider if there are any lessons for others, indeed for future campaigns. The comments that I'm going to give are my honest assessment of what happened at the time. They're not meant to offend. They may be challenging to some, but should be taken in comradeship. We all share the same aim. There is strength in unity. It is fair to say from the outset we viewed this campaign as a part of a wider struggle to defend public services. In that context, it is extremely encouraging to see that a debate is now opening up in this jurisdiction about what a progressive government in the future should look like. As these ideas develop, I would encourage you to keep your northern brothers and sisters in mind, who may also wish to make a contribution to that debate. The proclamation of Easter 1916 and the programme for government of the First Oil of 1919 have a valid resonance today in both jurisdictions. The water campaign in the north was arguably one of the most important movements to develop since the northern state was partitioned from the rest of Ireland. In a society that was built on and cemented by sectarian division and prejudice, it was no easy task to bring workers and communities together in common cause. There aren't many examples in the last 90 years where this had even been tried, never mind been successful. Added to that, the obvious challenge was the almost natural tendency of the Irish trade union movement to be quite conservative in its approach to issues. In 2005, my own union, NIPSA, passed a motion calling for the non-payment of water charges. The following year, a stronger motion was passed. But what fundamentally changed this campaign was the resolution adopted at the 2006 ICTU Northern Biennial Delegate Conference. That resolution opposed the privatisation of the water service, highlighted public opposition to the imposition of separate water charges, called for the establishment of a water coalition, and crucially called on the trade union movement to support a mass campaign of non-payment. The tension in the room during that debate was palpable. We were effectively calling on the trade union movement to support breaking the law. The euphoria, I have to tell you, from at least some of us, in that hall when the motion was passed will stay with me for a very long time. We had arrived. We knew it. The movement knew it. But more importantly, the politicians knew it too. At that point, the Assembly at Stormont was in one of its advance modes, as you know, so the UK government was in control. However, it was widely expected that the elections in May 2007 would see the Assembly back up and running, and this meant that local politicians would have to make the political decision on both the privatisation of the water service and the introduction of water charges. Unwittingly, but nevertheless helpfully, Peter Hain, the UK Secretary of State, had introduced legislation to facilitate the establishment of a government-owned company, a GoCo, which would then be privatised within 5 years, the setting up of a private billing company to collect the water charges, a utility regulator, and finally, the automatic imposition of water charges for every household if the Stormont Assembly was not re-established after the election. That immediately put the pressure on local parties to make the call. We had a short period of just a few months to get our act together on a range of fronts. We had a fairly simple message, though, to get out to the public. One, the water service wasn't for sale, and as a public utility, we wouldn't accept the privatisation of our water industry. Two, we were already paying for water charges through our rates bills. And three, we wouldn't accept separate additional water charges. So all of those factors came together at the one time for us, just like ducks in a row. So we immediately embarked on a public awareness campaign. We posted an information leaflet to every single house in the state, paid for by my union. We sought written legal advice on the consequences of not paying water charges. At that time, the nationalist parties in the north, both Sinn Féin and the SDLP, were extremely sceptical about encouraging non-payment. And to be honest, that was understandable. It was understandable up to a point at one section, because one section of the community had gone through a rent and rate strike in the early 70s in protest against internment. And many people had been left with heavy debts when it ended. We were convinced, however, that our campaign would be fundamentally different. We were bringing this campaign into every community. We were confident of being successful, as you rightly remain in the Right2Water campaign, and we were able to counter some of the negative comments from politicians about encouraging people to break the law and ending up with a criminal record. We obtained expert legal opinion, which we shared with the community, which made it absolutely clear that not paying water charges was not a criminal offence, rather one which would have to be dealt with through the small claims courts. We were confident, therefore, that we would bring the court service to a complete standstill if they attempted to issue a summons to 750,000 individual households. We also shared that legal advice, confirming that people's water could not be legally turned off. And no doubt Phil Hogan's comments about having the water turned down to a trickle is linked to that similar advice here in this state. We also successfully linked the UK government and the civil servants. We argued with them that we were already paying for water through our rate bills. With this breakthrough, it gave us a significant lift and increased credibility, as up to that point we had been openly accused of lying to the public on this issue. We established the Water Coalition. It was chaired by our then NIPSA General Secretary John Corrie on behalf of Vic2, and that again legitimised this campaign. The coalition included trade unions, the Belfast Trades Council and other trades councils, smaller campaign groups, pensioners groups, church groups, human rights groups, local community organisations and human rights groups. NIPSA also engaged in a world-renowned water campaigner, an expert in the area of privatisation of water utilities across the globe. David Hall, from the Public Service International Research Unit, produced a submission for the Water Coalition which would make the compelling case for maintaining a public water service without the imposition of additional water charges. This work dealt comprehensively with areas such as democratic accountability, governance arrangements, and also the critical area of imposing additional water charges. Building alliances with somebody like David Hall and the wider international Reclaim Public Water campaign is something that the Right2Water campaign should consider for the broader context of this campaign. So armed with our resolve to win this struggle, our leaflets, our legal advice, our PSI experts' deconstruction of the arguments about privatisation and the imposition of water charges, we took the debate into the heart of every single community. We made the case for mass non-payment as the most important and most effective tool to win this campaign. I have to be honest and say that we did face, at that point, significant political opposition from all main political parties at that time. But we went into every community. Meetings were organised by the local trades councils. We had 200, 300, sometimes 400 people in the room on occasions, admittedly sometimes just a handful too. But the Rubicon had been crossed. There was no community which had rejected us. There was no community which challenged our assertion that we were speaking on behalf of ordinary people in every community. There was no sectarian divide for us. We provided questions for people to raise with politicians when they came to their door looking for their votes in the Assembly election. I think it's fair to say that by that stage, the politicians were viewing us with growing concern. We challenged all political parties to commit their party to the non-payment campaign, to commit their representatives, if elected, to a position of not imposing water charges on the community, and also to publicly commit to keeping water in public ownership. One political party at one point attempted to put the onus onto a few civil servants not to issue the bills, or onto ordinary postal workers not to deliver those bills. We were able to counter that, I have to say. This wasn't the responsibility of a few workers who didn't actually have a trade dispute with their employers. This was about the whole community and the fact that the onus was actually on the politicians to make the change politically. In the last week, in the run-up to that election in 2007, things changed quite literally overnight. The DUP changed their manifesto in the week before the election, stating that they were now against water charges. Sinn Féin also committed itself not to introduce water charges. It was an incredible turnaround and a significant victory for what was a fairly small group of activists with the support of the whole community. The threat of mass non-payment had delivered that political change. And having been critical of Sinn Féin earlier for some of its decisions up to that point, I think it's entirely appropriate to put on record that one of the main reasons why water charges still haven't been introduced in the North today is because there was a Sinn Féin minister in charge of that civil service department immediately after that election. Once the party took the decision to oppose water charges, and it did it late, but it did it, once it took the decision to oppose it and oppose the privatisation of the water service, they have remained resolute in that opposition for the last 8 years. I have no doubt that once they moved to that position, it became extremely difficult for any other party to contradict or challenge that position. We worked constructively with the Sinn Féin minister on a range of governance issues throughout his time in office, and I would commend his commitment to stand against attempts by other politicians, other political parties, economists, big business and media commentators who have consistently attempted to reignite the debate over the last few years. There are still fears, however, for us in the North about water charges and privatisation. The more talk there is about public service cuts and that horrible word austerity, the more the right-wing clamber over themselves to promote water charges and the privatisation of the water service. The legislation to privatise still remains in the statute book. The Assembly are still required to take a political decision yearly, although initially it was for 3 years. So they take a decision yearly not to introduce water charges. The GoCo itself, the government-owned company, is still there. So all the structures, both legislatively and physically, remain intact to introduce charges and privatise the service at some point in the future if politicians change their minds. I remain convinced, however, that the single most important reason why this hasn't happened up to this point is because the politicians, or most of them now, remain afraid that people will revolt. In contrast to Phil Hogan's threat, we remain confident that we have the ability to turn on that tap again and let flow a river of mass opposition and mass non-payment, and we will flush away any political opposition that stands against the people, and we will do that, and we will deliver it. For the Right2Water campaign here, it seems to me that this should become the single biggest issue in the election next year. Despite what Minister Kelly has recently suggested in the media, this issue will be revisited before a single vote is cast next year. Citizens are becoming increasingly more aware of the power they actually have. If ICTU had the confidence to make a decision to come in behind this campaign, like they did in the North from 2007, if they had the confidence to do that, it would send such a powerful message to those in power that ordinary workers and ordinary decent people were standing confidently together and would almost certainly lead to a decisive victory. ICTU needs to seriously consider this position in advance of next year's election. This fight isn't over yet, but there can only be one victor, and the people in this room, I believe, can shape that victory. I wish you every success. No doubt I'll be marching with you again in the not-too-distant future. Go on, microphone.
Just in case I don't get out now. Is that the first time you've ever said that?
Just which one behind that one there?
Yeah.
Oh, is that enough, is it?
Thanks very much.
Sorry? No, I'll get it, yeah.
My name's Stevie Nolan, work for Trademark Belfast. Trademark Belfast is officially on record. We're the anti-sectarian unit of Congress. I won't go into the detail of that, but we spend most of our time dealing with loyalist paramilitaries. In 2009, we were asked by a group of community activists and some trade unionists to put together some seminars and some political schools to explain really the crash of 2008. We were quite surprised they came to us. We thought there were experts and people within the trade union and labour movements who knew all about this stuff. Apparently not. We put on a number of political schools in the summer of 2009 and they were full up. We ran 3 or 4 in a row, and there were 20 people, 30 people. And then we ran them for the next year, and eventually John Douglas, I don't know if he's here still, of Mandate, and Gibbo, somewhere there, invited us down to Dublin to do a one-day political economy class with Mandate's officials and headquarters staff. And after that, they took the decision, they must have enjoyed it, or got something out of it, they took a decision to roll it out to all of their shop stewards across Ireland. And since then, we've been in Sligo, Galway, Cork, Waterford, in Dublin, all across Ireland with Mandate, really basically explaining the bailout, explaining the crisis, helping people understand austerity not as policy, but austerity as ideology. Because alongside the industrial and political struggle that Mandate particularly is involved in, of course, we have to mention the bus strikers today who are on strike, resisting privatisation. Alongside that political industrial struggle, there is a battle of ideas. And our friend from Podemos mentioned it earlier. There's a narrative, a strong narrative in public discourse in the media that we need to challenge. We think that battle of ideas is best engaged through an understanding of political economy, something that we used to do 30 years ago, and particularly in the Labour movement, we're guilty of not doing it anymore. We did a survey of trade union education in Ireland and Britain 5 years ago. There was none. There was no one teaching systemic analysis of the system of capitalism, and simply that's what we do. It's not complicated. Name and identify the system, who benefits and how they benefit. That means understanding the infrastructure and the vehicles and the avenues they use to grab the wealth that we create. It means understand there's no value-free neutral economics. All economics is ideological. When you listen to anyone on the TV, whether it's George Lee or our other tosser Dave McWilliams talking on the television, you know they come from a particular school of neoclassical right-wing economics, and it's important to recognise that. We need to actively discuss and promote visions of just alternatives. This is what we do in our political schools. I've got 10 minutes here to squeeze 3 days, so you'll forgive me if I rush. And of course, the last one, participate in the construction of democratic organisations capable of challenging that system. Myself as a trade union activist, but also as a partner in the Right2Water campaign, taking politics out onto the streets and creating democratic structures that might be campaigns, they might be trade unions, they might be community groups, they might be cooperatives. And we think, and of course we have 3 days to do all that, 4 days sometimes, 5 days if we're very lucky. There are people here who can attest to that training. It's impactful, it's interactive, it's intense, and it takes us on a historical journey from, I don't know, about maybe 800 or 900 years. But if we're looking for a date to start to understand the current phase in development and why there's a logic behind privatisation, it's not just a policy or an accident, you could do worse than perhaps think of the first 9/11 in Chile in 1973, when Pinochet, alongside mass murder and torture and the destruction of Chilean democracy, flew in 5 economists from the Chicago School of Economics, one of whom was Milton Friedman, Arnold Harberger, and gave them the option or the task of remaking the Chilean economy. And through a book called Ladrillo, the brick, big, thick, heavy brick, they redesigned, if you like, the Chilean economy, and they called it the Chilean experiment. And it became a model, and it became a model for the rest of the planet. It became a model for people all around the world to implement and to copy. Now, we might know it as neoliberalism, you might know it as Thatcherism. If you're in the States, you'll know it as Reaganomics. If you're in West Africa, you'll know it as structural readjustment programs implemented by the IMF or the World Bank. And you might know it, of course, or, well, Europe knows it as austerity. It happens in different places at different times with different names, but it has one destination, and that's a new kind of economics and a new kind of politics. And we know it, and it's characterised by things that you'll all know, and you'll all know very well, but it's our task and it's our job to understand them. One of the most important and one of the most complex ones is the emergence and dominance of finance capital, the use of debt, the trading in debt, the use of derivatives and futures markets, trading in goods that are not yet even grown or produced, and currency trading, rich people buying and selling money off each other. Completely socially useless activities that yet in themselves have the ability to crash the system at any moment. We also have to recognise the characteristic of this system as the retreat, if not the defeat, of organised labour across the globe, the death of social democracy, an obsession with foreign direct investment seeking out sites of low wages, low taxes in a global race to the bottom, and of course, as we all know, massive and rising inequality, not just within nation states, but across the globe. Ireland is now top of the table, the most unequal country in the European Union. And that's all based, of course, upon the myth of trickle-down economics, the idea that if you let wealth accumulate at the top of society, some of it will trickle down to the rest of us. But we know what capital does when we let wealth accumulate at the top. apart from buying yachts and gold watches, it speculates with it. It creates more financial bubbles, which again crash on top of the rest of us. But central to the entire project, the backbone of the neoliberal project, of course, is privatisation. And that's what we want to talk. That's what we're all talking about today. And so what you see emerging across the globe, everywhere, in every region, every continent, every state, is full spectrum domination of a particular kind of free market ideology, to which, of course, there is no alternative. And it's one of the most dangerous narratives in the modern age. The dictatorship of no alternatives has colonised academia, it's colonised our political space, it's colonised our classrooms. Our kids do entrepreneurialism from the age of 5 and 6 years old. And unfortunately, it's colonised the labour movement. I've been told so many times in the last 5 years that I'm utopian, I'm not pragmatic enough, I'm naive, or worse, what I say is uneconomic. I don't even know what that word means. And the beauty about this system, of course, is you don't need a conspiracy theory to describe it or to point to it. They're very open about what they're doing. And they're telling us quite openly that they're coming for everything. It's not just water, it's everything. It's 100 years' worth of social investment in social goods that they're coming for. $9 trillion sale, how governments could cut their debt and improve efficiency by selling off the assets. And of course, it's not selling assets or selling the family silver is a wrong analogy to make. This is worse. Selling the family silver is a one-off bonus. This is putting a toll booth between us, our children, our communities, and the services that we need to live and survive and live dignified lives. And if you can't pay the toll, then you can fuck off. And you can go and beg to a food bank or beg to a charity or beg at a church. It's a system that has allowed 80 people on the planet to own 50% of the world's assets and wealth. It's a staggering level of inequality. And of course, it's not just about the privatisation of, well, everything. It's also about, and you know this better than anyone, the privatisation of water. This took place in Athens this week. I haven't had a chance to speak to our Syriza comrade about what happened at it. Apologies for those of you who've seen this before. The Global Water Summit, the Water Value Revolution, it was the meeting of all the global water companies on the planet to discuss the future commodification of water systems everywhere. And of course, some of the workshops were about water conservation, some workshops about infrastructural investment in water and so on. But just in case you're unsure as to the actual purpose of that conference, you just have to look at their website. www.watermeetsmoney.com. The beauty of the system is they're not hiding anything from us. They're coming for it. They're coming for everything. They go on to say they're bringing top water leaders together to share their water management insights and to point the way towards making water an economic value. And one of the companies, we've already heard about them before, one of the great evil empire, Veolia is one of the sponsors of that company, along with Thames Water and all the other water companies. The result, as I said, of this neoliberal project, with privatisation at its backbone, if you like, and that's the way they steal the wealth, is massive inequality. And again, they don't hide it. I love the way they boast about it and they kind of laugh in our faces. And they produce lists, the Sunday Times rich list. In America, it's the Forbes 400 richest Americans. Look at that fat. They are really. And they sit there and smug with their billions. And the amounts of money these people have is not... We're having a laugh at this. Oh, anyway. The amounts of money they have, I don't have words to describe it. Grotesque and obscene come to mind. The Walton family, we've worked for them. That's Asda in Northern Ireland. Combined worth of nearly 90 billion. Just to put it into context of what that means for an average worker working as a cashier for Walmart. It would take someone making $20,000 a year, 1 million years, to net the amount of money that one of those Walton siblings is worth. One of the siblings, not the whole 90 billion, about 20 of it. 1 million years to earn the same kind of money they're working for their boss. That's the kind of level of inequality that's staggering and unheard of in history, really. It's a kind of inequality that's hard to contemplate. And people were joking about the Hunger Games recently, about that could never happen on this planet. It's emerging in South America, it's emerging in Eastern Europe, it's emerging in Russia. We're having rich people retreat behind gated communities, patrolled by private security guards. It's not a myth and it's not a joke to say that the levels of inequality are making society more unstable, and social instability is there. Why those people, someone said, I think it was Big Mick there in Kerry, why don't they jump over the fence? And it's a very good question of why this is being allowed to happen, why we are letting this happen to our world, to our community, to our nation states. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership currently, as you all know, currently being negotiated behind closed doors in the European Commission, is a bit like neoliberalism planting a big fucking flag in the middle of Europe saying, this is ours. And that we have to stop, because it's not just about the commodification of water or the privatisation of buses or the privatisation of health insurance. It's the privatisation of everything. Here's a quote from Pascal Kearney. He's one of the key lobbyists. There's about 2,000 lobbyists working at the moment. 2,000 lobbyists working at the moment in Brussels, negotiating TTIP on behalf of the private and corporate sector. And he said, industry will oppose any deal in which investment protection is traded off against public policy objectives like human and labour rights. Rachel from Cork said last week that is a sociopathic system, and it is sociopathic. In that system, there is no love, there is no empathy, there is no community, there's no solidarity, there is just the pursuit of profit. And if we follow that logic to its natural end, we're all screwed. And TTIP specifically promotes, of course, access to public monopolies, and the contradiction in this is massive, to promote competition in the interest of the consumer. How do you have a competition in a private monopoly? And of course, as we know, the investor-state dispute resolution system, or private corporate courts, will make it nearly impossible for any nation-state to renationalise anything that's that's privatised because of the ISDR. Private courts sitting with private judges. So under current conditions, we're facing, as our friend from Conrad from Syriza said, we're facing the end of the period, the golden period of capitalism, if you like, the end of the welfare state. So the task, or what we have to ask ourselves, is do we defend it, or do we look to replace it with more radical social transformation? I think it's the second one. Our future depends... Our future does depend on developing extra parliamentary social struggle to affect the balance of power in society, through mobilisations we see here today of broad social forces, bottom up. And I'm not going to say it, but I'll let one of the richest men on the planet say it. There is class warfare, all right, but it's my class, the rich class, that's making war, and we're winning. Warren Buffett. Now, the struggle against that ideology, the struggle against neoliberalism, is one that you engage with on the streets, through politics, through trade unionism. And my pitch and our pitch, I've gone off a bit on a rant there, but is that educating ourselves is simply part of that struggle. It's not more important or less important. The whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. We need to challenge those that call themselves experts. We need to democratise that knowledge and bring it back into communities and back into the labour movement, and generate in workers and in communities a hunger for that knowledge. And it demands education programmes, not that just build collective identity, or that provide simple answers to complex questions or slogans, but one that provides people with the analytical tools that they can use to interpret the world they live in, and by doing so, change it. Thank you. Gormaigi. It was all right.
Thanks, Stevie, and thanks, Paddy. I think Stevie, that's the warmest welcome an Englishman got in this building since they left in 1921. Okay, we're going to move quickly on because we're way behind time, but I think it's all very important stuff. The next guest, we're going to have to make a presentation from Maynooth University, Dr. Rory Ahern, who has done some research with his team of MA students, master students, and the Right2Water campaign and the water movement in general. Rory.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to try Oscuelga Banachty Law on Luchta Braíomh, which is the Irish for Happy Workers' Day. I'm going to run through very quickly. I have 15 minutes. Some of you might know me and know I could go on for a lot longer. But just in terms of what I did, and a team of us in Maynooth that my students tried to do, was when the protests emerged in October and November of last year, obviously those of us who were involved were getting a sense that there was really something profound happening here. And so we tried to really assess and give the movement, people involved in the movement, the opportunity to explain why they were involved in the protests. And of course, part of the reason was to counter this narrative that it was just about water charges, it was some limited reaction, and to really get behind why people were protesting. So I'm sure quite a few people in this room filled it out, and if you didn't, then it shows that it's even more significant again, because 2,500 people who were involved in the water protest filled it out online. I suppose the big question it's answering is, where was the Irish protest? And it was contrasted in Spain. We see the protest there from the plaza in Spain, the massive demonstrations in 2010 and 11, and the question was, where was the protest against austerity in Ireland? Enda Kenny was covered on the cover of Time magazine in 2012, saying the Irish people understand that you have to do difficult things to sort out your own finances. The narrative was, we all partied, we're all guilty, and we understood austerity was a necessary medicine. Of course, what happened was the movement of people, which is important to acknowledge that it is the biggest social movement since independence in this country. So I think everyone in this room should congratulate yourselves for being involved in creating that movement. And what this research will show is, do not underestimate what is going on right now and what you're involved in creating. In terms of the questions then, the hardcore research, people were asked why did they protest, and they were given multiple options. So what you can see from this, or whether you can or you can't, is that the first option was, were they protesting to get a reduction in the charges? You can see that there is the smallest reason. Much, much bigger is to get an abolition of the water charges, to stop the future privatisation of water, again very significant. Water is a human right, significant. Water charges will increase in inequality, a bit less. Austerity has gone too far was actually the biggest reason people chose why they protested. And also the bank bailouts and the debt was also very significant. People outlined that this was much more than just opposition to water and even austerity. People talked about the corruption, the government, the anger at the betrayal of the 2011 general election promises, and I will come on to that in a little bit. The sense of anger at corruption that the government was giving away and privatising Ireland's natural resources to the government's corporate friends in the Golden Circle. The inequality of austerity, that the government was protecting wealthy people like tax exile Dennis O'Brien and shafting ordinary families. And what was interesting in the survey, that over and over again came up Dennis O'Brien, SiteServe, GM Sierra, and what they were doing. And of course, it was only the last while we've seen it come into the public domain, but you have understood what was going on from the very start. The question of democracy, we no longer live in a democracy, the role of the guards and the arrests. We are citizens and not just consumers. The contempt that the political class have for working class people, the lack of respect for dignity of human beings, and a debt that is simply not ours. So what is clear, and as you know, this is much, much more than just about water. So the big question that we all wonder, and some of us know, and some of you know, why was it so successful? The people described it who responded as that it has awoken, the movement woke up the Irish people. It has united them and given them hope. It has rallied Irish people from all walks of life. It has informed solidarity across all classes and social groups, and people are becoming politically aware. And one of the questions that I was asked in the survey was, had you ever protested before? And a majority, 55%, had not protested before. And that is probably even much larger. But this is a movement, as you know, that is involving people who have not been involved in protests before. Not just haven't been involved in left-wing activism or haven't been involved in a protest recently, but never protested before. What is also interesting that came back from it was the role of social media. And this is interesting as well when you look at the protest movement internationally, the indignados, the rise of the anti-globalization movement, is the internet and social media has played a really important role in giving people an access to information and democratizing media in a way that the establishment media hasn't covered the issues. And this shows that the overwhelming majority of people were informed about the movement from social media. And that is when we talk about, well, how can we build an alternative? Social media clearly has a strong role to play in terms of people informing themselves and also organising. 1 second now, I'm running through here. 15 minutes to describe this. Okay. To move it on, to try and connect with what's going on today, there's a huge amount in this report, and it's online, you can read it. The significance, we also asked about politics and what did people think about political alternatives, about the need for alternatives and how they felt about the existing parties. And it is important for us to realise that a lot of people did actually vote for Labour and Fine Gael in the last election, who are now protesting and part of this movement. And the figures were the majority, between 55% and 65%, the figures are a bit confusing, but definitely over half of the people who filled out the survey had voted for Labour or Fine Gael in the last election. So we do have to understand that, again, this is people new to politics, but what was significant in their responses was that their extent of their anger at Labour in particular for this sense of betrayal of what they promised to do is so deep that they have moved away from them, and I'll show you in a minute who they indicated that they intend to vote for in the coming election. One of them described quite accurately a lot of the sentiment, which was, "I've lost all faith in the government. I was swayed in my last vote by promises that were not met. I knew the job to exit the Troika and recover from austerity would be hard, but the low-income working-class people have really felt the brunt of this government, and the wealthy and rich have once again emerged unscathed. Unfair, unjust promises broken. I will not trust the main parties again. Time for change, time for change." And this came back again and again. People described our political system as broken. Our politicians and political parties are owned by corporate elites who act in their favour. I'm not standing for it anymore. I want a government of the people. Another one said, "The Republic has failed its people. The country needs to start anew." So this is clearly a very strong anti-establishment, against the establishment parties, the sentiment that's there, people feeling let down. So, unsurprisingly, this was the people, the different groups that people indicated who they're going to vote for in the next election. Roughly a third was for people before profit and the anti-austerity lines, which we put together in one category, whether they'd like it or not. But just to try... It was for ease of simplicity at the time. But Left Independents roughly got a third as well, and Sinn Féin got a third as well. What was significant in that was clearly that those who voted were indicating they were voting for the left. This is not a movement that can be captured by Renua. This is not a movement of... And we can laugh about it, but it is a possibility. We know there are lots of independents out there who are not of the perspective of genuine anti-establishment, anti-austerity, but will present themselves as that. But what's clear is that the sentiment is there. Also, what's significant in that is that a very, very small amount of people said they weren't going to vote, which is significant as well, that people are engaging in the political system in that way. So they are looking for a political alternative. What was even more interesting was people were asked, do they think there's a need for a new political party? So saying they're indicating this level of support for the different groups, an overwhelming majority, 78%, said that there was a need for a new political party or movement. Now, it's very difficult to really figure out what do they mean by that, but we also asked them what were the key issues that a new party should prioritise, and I'd really encourage people to read the comments and responses to this, that they highlighted equality and fairness being the first issue that they wanted to be worked on. Also, equality and fairness, political reform, standing up to Europe on the issues of debt and the bank bailouts and natural resources, putting Irish people first. And following on from the comments from Podemos, from Eduardo, what was interesting that only 8% of people picked a left-wing party. And And I'll come on to this a little bit in my analysis of what this means, but also people identified the housing and the homelessness crisis. So I've analysed it as saying people want a party, a new party or movement, that would stand on a broad platform of anti-austerity, for radical political reform, which would involve the clearing out of the establishment political parties from power, that is anti-corruption, anti-cronyism, for a democracy where a government acts for the people and not the elite or the golden circle, and where the ordinary people have the power over government. They wanted to stand for fairness, equality and social justice in the economy where housing, health, water, education are provided as human rights for all citizens, and in particular where the vulnerable are protected. They also believe it should stand for justice on the debt related to the bailout in the banks from Europe, and where the natural resources of Ireland are used for the people of Ireland, to benefit the people of Ireland. So I've tried, working over the last couple of months and with other people, tried to think through what does this mean, and what are people saying to us about how we can progress an alternative. And I've used the frame of Podemos to try and develop this in the sense of looking for a popular politics that is beyond left or right, because what was interesting was the left didn't come back as the main issue people wanted. What they wanted were these broader issues and these broader policies, which are clearly, we can see in those of us on the left, they are left-wing policies, but they're not the way in which people are expressing them. And if we want to, and this is the question posed by Podemos, if we want to win power and to become the majority, not in 10 years' time or in 20 years' time or in 30 years' time, but if we want to do it in the coming election or the election after that, it means we have to convince the majority to support a new political movement. And we have to involve them in that. And that means that we have two challenges. One is developing the story, the narrative, the language and ideas that can connect with a majority. And the second thing is, how do we involve them in that process of change? How can they be part of leading? And that requires new methods of politics. I would suggest that the narrative, our story, is, on the one side we have what we will see in the coming election and down the line is that austerity worked in Ireland. We have recovery, tax cuts, privatisation, and Ireland is the best small country in the world to do business, or tax evasion, whichever one you want. But our narrative should be, austerity destroyed the country. Austerity destroyed our communities. The recovery is one for the top 20 or 30%, while the majority are suffering with debt, homelessness, repossessions, precariousness, and we have a golden circle of billionaires controlling the country. The figures came out last week that we have 250 people in this country who have a combined wealth of 75 billion. This was the Sunday Times. And their wealth increased by 15% last year. We have, and the suggestion is the narrative of using the Republic. That we have a Nama Republic, a Dennis O'Brien Republic, a Bankers Republic. But if we want a People's Republic and a new republic, we need to do something different. And that's where we need to talk and develop alternatives. What is clear is that people are looking for an alternative. There is the potential for a new political movement. I believe there is the potential, and it shows in the opinion polls, 40% of people are either going for independence or undecided, or Sinn Féin and the left, even more if you include Sinn Féin and the left. So we do have the potential to become a majority if we change, if we do, and figure out how we can involve people and address these problems. I'll finish with the quote from Padraig Pearse's poem, The Rebel, and it says, "And I say to my people's masters, beware, beware of the thing that is coming, beware of the risen people." The people in Ireland have risen. It's up to us to convert that into real refoundation of our republic.
Thank you very much indeed, Rory. It's very useful information for us all here and for us all to ponder on. Cordial friends, Des Fagan's my name from the CPSU, and that's the Civil Public and Services Union, not the Communist Party, the Soviet Union, some people might say. We've a proud tradition of fighting against austerity. I think we've been at it nearly 8 years now, when I took over the job. So as soon as I took over the job, we were out fighting against pay cuts and pension levies. And you can blame me, guys. But really, what we did experience over those years was how you get treated when you go against what the main thoughts of the day are, what the media are saying and everything else. And what they were trying to do was split us apart. They were trying to set us aside as somebody who needed to be attacked or needed to be treated in a certain way, and everybody else was okay, be treated differently. And we experienced that, and we see it today. But we have stood and we will stand shoulder to shoulder with our brothers and sisters in other trade unions in their fights, such as Mandate with Dunnes Stores and the bus workers today. And we know, and the people know, it's just the politicians don't get it, that we don't want privatisation. We don't want it. They can do it somewhere else, wherever they want, but we don't want it. And maybe some of the TDs, Chakti Dala, who are here today, could take this away. An interesting little story. When we organise for our low-paid members in the revenue commissioners, and they wanted to outsource I was glad in a way because they were outsourcing some of the call centre for the property tax, because a lot of our members were opposed to the property tax, so we didn't have that difficulty. But they wanted to outsource it, and they did eventually outsource it. And they outsourced it to a company called Abtran. And we found out later that Abtran don't even pay tax in this country. So the revenue commissioners were using a company in Ireland that don't want to pay tax in this country. So that's how far we've got. So that's just something to ponder on. And I just wanted to say before I introduce the next speaker, Michael Taft from the Right Trade Union is going to give us what I believe are some startling revelations on economics. And when we say Michael's is an economist with Right Trade Union, that we don't have any groans. Economic thought and economic teaching is a hard subject and a heavy subject to get your head around. But I believe Michael's going to make very light work of it. So if you can give Michael a warm welcome, thanks very much.
Thank you. Comrades, brothers and sisters, when the left wins the next election and forms the first progressive government in the history of the state, we will be inheriting a number of problems. Years of recession and austerity has left our social infrastructure, health and education in desperate need of repair. 1.5 million people live in deprivation. We have a crisis in low pay and precarious work conditions, a crisis in investment. We have one of the weakest indigenous enterprise sectors in Europe, and the only industrial policy we have is to assist multinationals to avoid and evade their taxes. And a golden circle of corporate and political interests that will fight like hell to maintain and extend their spheres of control. And if these challenges aren't enough, then the range of interests that will line up against us will be truly daunting. I mean, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael won't be the problem. You will have IBEC, ISME, the SFA. You will have Chambers Ireland and the American Chambers of Commerce. You will have media and a queue of commentators having a go at us. Independent House, CEOs of multinationals, EU institutions, IMF, and the OECD, a whole alphabet of hostile forces that will seek to undermine us from the first day. If you're in any doubt, just ask Theresa. The 5 trade unions affiliated to Right2Water are seeking to bring together all the historical, ideological, and community strands that comprise progressive politics to meet these challenges, to start a dialogue that will hopefully lead to an agreed set of policy principles that will form the core of a progressive government, policies that are radical and deliverable. We're going to start this process. I think somebody's after me is going to talk about how this process is going to start. We have a few ideas. We want to put more ideas over the next 6 weeks leading up to June 13th. We invite all the organizations and individuals and parties in here to participate in that process. The things that we'll be issuing today are not in any order of priority, but they're all urgent. And one of the most urgent tasks for us is to break from the low tax, low spend, low service, low investment model that is being foisted us on by the government. This is the trap that is being set for a future progressive government that was laid out in clear detail in the spring statement that was issued a couple of days ago. A set of budgetary rules that will permanently immobilize national governments and impoverish the people of Europe. I mean, I don't know if any of you have taken a look at these rules. I don't know what you can make of this cookbook. You take a heaping of a 10-year rolling average of potential GDP, which cannot be measured in the real world, made up of components like total factor productivity, which cannot be made up in the real world. You stir in a bit of convergence margin, you pour into a GDP deflator, you put in the oven and bake until the reference ratio minus the convergence margin divided by 100, multiplied by the price GDP deflator, tells you the allowable nominal spending growth that you are allowed per annum minus DRM, discretionary revenue measure. Take the cake out of the oven, let set for 10 minutes, and don't forget to subtract 1. That's it. This is Father Ted economics. A progressive government will deal with these rules now that they are in our Constitution, approved by the majority of people, even under duress. We will push them out and manipulate them and use them in every way possible, but more importantly, we will work with our comrades throughout Europe, Syriza and Podemos and all progressive forces to unravel these rules at the EU level. And on June 13th, or before June 13th, the Right2Water Unions will publish an alternative fiscal framework to show how we can use these rules to our advantage. The government is launching a second phase of austerity. The first phase was when ministers stood up in the Dáil and announced actual cuts in euros and cents in public spending programs. Now, the second phase, what will happen is the spending will not maintain the rate of inflation. In other words, the value of it will be cut. And this at a time of increased democratic pressures. We are entering into an indefinite period of what can be called real austerity. A progressive government will reverse this. We do not fully appreciate how little we spend in this country. We'd have to spend an extra 10 to 12 billion euros a year on public services, social protection and investment just to reach the EU average, just the EU average. The government claims that they will do more with less. The reality is that they will do less with less. Why? Because the government is locking us in to a low-tax economy, one that will benefit the interest of capital over people. And unlike before the crash, you could subsidize tax cuts from the windfall of speculation. Right now, we're paying for the speculation. So the only way the government can subsidize the tax cuts is through depressing living standards and outsourcing and privatizing public services. Comrades, progressives compete over tax cuts at their peril. Workers in Ireland are not highly taxed by EU standards. However, our living standards are highly taxed, highly priced, and highly inadequate. We are driven into the private sector to purchase goods and services that workers in other countries get from the public sector for free or at below market rates. I'll give you an example. If I could have a glass of water, if there's a free glass there, it doesn't matter, I'll drink anybody's. I don't know if any of you saw this recent program on RTE, Claire Byrne Live, and they compared living standards in France and Ireland. And the program revealed, thank you, that in France, get this, child care and early childhood education is free and universal. It costs €7 to go to a GP. And if you are made unemployed, you get 80%, 80% of your last wage for over a year. And of course, they went to the panel, and the panel said, oh, this is great. But the Irish workers wouldn't pay the tax levels that French workers pay to provide these services and income supports. Now, what they didn't know, or what they didn't want to tell you, was that actually Irish workers pay a higher tax rate than French workers. So how do the French do it? And how do other countries do it? The social wage, or what's called employers' social insurance. A strong social wage allows workers to avail of services such as health care and prescription medicine at subsidized prices. It gives them a range of benefits such as pay-related sickness benefits, enhanced family supports, and pay-related state pensions so that workers don't have to go into the private sector and buy expensive and uncertain pensions. It is about increasing the living standards of people. And because so much expenditure goes through the social wage, through employers' social insurance, that frees up the exchequer. That frees up money to invest in affordable childcare and early childhood education, increased supports for the elderly and disabled, quality nursing homes, affordable recreation facilities, and investment in our economic infrastructure. Let's be clear, without a strong social wage, one of two things is going to happen. Either Irish workers will have to pay for those enhanced public services, income supports, and investment out of their own pocket, or more likely, they'll have to go without. A progressive government will not let this happen. It will introduce a new social contract based on the expansion of the public economy, funded by a strong social wage, so that people can participate in collective and shared provision. Now, recently, the government now has just been throwing a sop to the low-paid. They're promising to take hundreds of thousands of low-paid workers out of the tax net. The problem isn't that the low-paid are taxed. The problem is that they are low-paid. The problem is that they are working under intolerable conditions, zero-hour contracts, low-hour contracts. They do not have the right that every other worker in Europe has to bargain collectively with their employer, and they have very little, if any, power in the workplace. A few extra euros in the pocket will not make up for this oppression and lack of rights, and will in fact undermine the state's ability to promote their living standards. Progressives, therefore, will champion the living wage, but not through exhortation or relying on the goodwill of employers. You'd be waiting a long time for that. We will do it through concrete strategies to make a living wage reality. We will strengthen and extend joint labor committees to empower more and more workers through mandatory bargaining, and we will introduce an authentic right to collective bargaining. In other words, we will make Ireland the best little country to work in. But if we're going to make work pay, if we're going to provide enhanced life opportunities and life chances for people, for workers, community, for the economy, we need to talk about wealth generation. You know, the left and progressives, that's all they used to talk about, was production, about how you organize this sector through the different models of ownership, how they are directed and invested in, and how they are socially accountable. That's all we used to talk about. But somewhere on the way to the 21st century, we stopped talking about production. In fact, what we did was we left all that discussion about production to the employers and to the business pages. What did we do? We let employers create the wealth, and we debated about how we redistribute that wealth. In other words, in the capitalist economy, we became welfarists. We should take back the ground that progressives traditionally held and talk about production, organizing in a prosperous indigenous enterprise sector through new and expanding public enterprises, new models of ownership from labor management to co-determination between public and private and civil society. There is a plethora of models and activities and energy that is waiting to be welled up, but it cannot do so under the current model. The campaigns over oil and gas reserves, woodlands, clean seas, heritage sites, community life. This speaks to another vitally important aspect of our indigenous economy, resource democracy. If the people of Ireland truly have a right to the natural resources of Ireland, then those natural resources must, by definition, be entrusted into an accountable and democratic public agency that will use those resources to the benefit of people. But finally, on this issue, on the issue of the indigenous economy, I hope that we never, ever, ever forget the fundamental lesson of this crisis. And that is that private banking based on private shareholder value will never serve the interest of the productive economy. We need a public banking system that will be partners with people's living standards and the successes of business, whether public or private. Partners and not parasites. The reason why we have to enter the debate over wealth generation is quite simply this. Business in Ireland is too important to be left to Irish business. It belongs to people. And debt is too important to be left to creditors and bankers. A progressive government will promote a European debt conference that will seek a debt resolution, not just for the peripheral countries. This is a Eurozone crisis and must be resolved for all the workers of the Eurozone. And then we will apply the same principles domestically. I don't know about you, but I think it is the height of obscenity that the same institutions that created the crisis of household debt are now being allowed to drive the resolution of the crisis they started in the first place. What we need is an accountable and democratic public agency that will take over the task of restructuring and writing down household debt in the public interest. From an environmental crisis that will necessitate the crisis of climate change, an existential crisis that will need a new economic order of sustainability, to political reform that just doesn't reconfigure parliamentary practices, though that is important, but will also deepen popular democratic intervention in the decision-making process itself.
2 minutes, Michael.
Yeah. And a housing policy that, by the way, just isn't about supply. It's not just about supply. It is about breaking with the speculative nature of housing provision through new ownership models and, most importantly, a strong public economy role in the private sector. These are just some of the issues we want to bring forward. We hope that you will bring forward more of these issues to debate and decide on June 13th. And just finally, I want to say this about the role of the 5 Right2Water Trade Unions. We do admit it. We have a vested interest in this. We want to build the broadest possible coalition behind specific principles that goes beyond simple oppositionism. We're not suggesting that we write a manifesto or detailed policy principles. That's for yourselves, activists, and people in their respective political parties, trade unions, civil society groups to do. But in agreeing a set of shared principles, we hope to provide a platform that will inform a unity of purpose. This unity invites everyone to contribute. It is not sectarian. It does not exclude. It does not privilege one ideological or historical or community strand or another. It's a democratic coalition. And in a democratic coalition, respect for each other is paramount, especially when there is honest agreement between means and methods. That's our goal, comrades and brothers and sisters. We hope it's everybody's goal. We can today begin the work of putting together a narrative that will guide the first ever left government in the Republic. It's in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And as Michael's address, like all of the other things we're doing today, will be made available online. We're running very, very late. Des, I'm going to give this mic to you now. We're running very, very late, and while Michael was talking there, you would have had a booklet handed out. Just to say on Rory's presentation analysed some of the statistics, some of the views, some of the wants and the needs and the objectives of the people involved in the campaign. Of course, the campaign began, and everybody in this room is very, very aware of it, the campaign began in the communities and on the streets out of anger and resistance to the installation of water meters in communities all around Ireland. And that should never be forgotten, where the genesis of this campaign is. It's in the streets, it's in the homes, and it's in the communities. Now, we've had a very, very full programme, and if it feels like there wasn't a lot of room or space for participant interaction, that's because there wasn't. What we are trying to do, however, what we are trying to do and what we are going to do now is we are going to launch a 6-week process, at least a 6-week process. Hopefully it will go on for months. It might well go on for years. But we are definitely launching a 6-week process, which we hope will include every citizen in every town, village, union, non-union, party, non-party, in the whole 26 counties and beyond, in a consultation process on some policy principles that are in a document that you all now have, and any other policy principles that people in support of a new, of a more equal and of a fairer Ireland want to see developing. What we want to do, and we are going to have, it's been alluded to here several times now, a second part of this conference, which will be much more participatory. In fact, it will be totally participatory on the 13th of June. And the way that conference will be organised has not been decided and will be decided in partnership, we hope, with all of you and all of your groups and all of your parties and all of the tens and maybe hundreds of thousands of people who would love to be here but can't be here and want to be part of this discussion. And we are determined, and I'm sure you all are determined, will be part of this discussion. So there are a number of people throughout the afternoon. Well, hold on. There are a number of people throughout the afternoon. Who have wanted to speak and haven't been able to speak. In terms of the document you have in front of you, first of all, nothing is decided. That's the key thing. And if anybody walks out of this room and presents this document to any person as something that has been decided, preordained, then they are being dishonest. This is a discussion document. This is a discussion document. This is not an end. This is not an end. This is a beginning. And it's a very small beginning. It's a very tentative beginning. And hopefully, with all of your participations, it will develop, it will change, it will morph, and it will grow. But for now, we are putting out for discussion as a starting point a small number of principles outlined in that document. And it won't come as any surprise. It won't come as any surprise. It won't come as any surprise that the first... It won't come as any surprise that the first piece of paper you see, the green pages, are a discussion document, policy principles around our right to water and an alternative way of looking at Irish water. And myself and Des will alternate quickly. And please, please, please take this document away with the greatest of respect to everybody you know. It's going to be online. Everything that happened today is going to be online. This is going to be online. We're going to try to facilitate meetings. You will have your own meetings. And please do not misrepresent this document as anything other than a very, very small tentative start. On water, what the document proposes is the abolition of domestic water charges within the first 100 days of a new government. What the document proposes, as we continue to discuss, is that Irish water be abolished and that Irish water be replaced by a single utility responsible for sanitation and solely responsible for the provision of transmission, sanitation, management and the operation of the public water system. We propose, the trade unions propose, at the Right2Water demonstration on the 21st of March, that when Irish water is abolished, there would be a constitutional amendment, not just any old constitutional amendment stuck into any old place at any old book, a specific, enumerated constitutional amendment in a specific place in the 1937 Constitution, a new Article 28.421 that will simply read, and this is not rocket science, The government shall be collectively responsible for the protection, management and maintenance of the public water system. The government shall ensure in the public interest that this resource remains in public ownership and management. So that's a proposed constitutional referendum, and that's something we think would protect when Irish water is abolished, and it will be abolished. They're going to tell us we need to spend money on water. They're going to tell us we need to spend money on water. And this policy is proposing a very quick spend of €6 to €7 billion, funded in a progressive way that we will set out in full, because Michael and other people in the economic sphere are working on a new taxation model, which Michael has alluded to in his powerful address. And that will be discussed in more detail on the 13th of June. What it won't be is poor and middle-income people continuing to funnel money up to the rich. That's what it won't be. What it will be is about a water system that is funded through progressive taxation, that is free of the point of use, that gives to our right to water, which is an essential component of our right to life, and which ensures that this country, the Republic of Ireland, continues to be a country in Europe, currently the only country in Europe, which has zero water poverty. So that's the proposals for discussion and consultation on the water policy. Des is going to take you through the jobs and decent work.
Thanks, Brendan. Something that's close to all of our hearts should be decent work. And I think the quote at the start of that is very relevant. It's talking about, in the Second World War, governments found money to kill people. They found money somewhere to kill people, but they can't find money to give us decent jobs and collective bargaining, and that's what we're looking for. So what we're talking about is dignity and respect at work, and a living wage. And Michael alluded to in his speech that we're going to aim for a wage that's a living wage, not just a minimum wage, a wage that people can live on and have a decent life on. And we're also talking about collective bargaining, something that's of great interest to the trade union movement, but should be of great interest to everybody, because everybody has brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers at work, and we need to make the workplace decent, and the people who can do that through democracy at work are the trade union movement, and we need that enshrined in legislation, because we've been waiting nearly 20 or 30 years for promises on trade union legislation. Brendan also talked about PRSI. I actually remember when PRSI, because I was made redundant nearly 30 years ago, and you got more money than because you got pay-related social insurance, and it lasted for about a year, but they whittled that down over the years, and now there's nothing there. So we're talking about proper pay-related social insurance that pays for your health and all the services that you should require on a decent basis for citizens in the country. Thanks, Brendan.
OK, there's been a lot of talk in the last number of months, and we've definitely, as Jimmy Kelly alluded to earlier on, we've fallen upon a serious homelessness crisis where, for the first time since the famine, we have actually families being made homeless in this state in the last number of months. We have a quote there from Jordan Flaherty, award-winning journalist and producer and author, that housing is a human right, and that proposed policy principles that are being put out there for consultation are that we believe that housing is a basic human right, that this right should be enshrined in Bunreacht na hÉireann, and that the obligation of the state to adequately house people should be enforceable by the courts. Having a home is a social and economic right. A progressive policy will develop a range of housing models to vindicate this right. It's OK having rights. We need policies to vindicate our rights, starting with the ending of homelessness and the clearing of the social housing list. The current crisis in rents should be addressed through rent controls in the short term, but in the long term the state needs to intervene in the market to mobilise the investment required to modernise the sector. The state also needs to commence a national home building project. It gives people jobs too. People should also be offered the opportunity to own their homes through limited equity ownership or non-speculative housing. So that's the proposal. There are other bits in there as well for consultation. The next one is
healthcare.
Health.
Thanks, Brendan. Healthcare is one of the most important issues that faces everybody in this country today. We've got a disgraceful situation with people on trolleys, can't even get proper services from their hospitals. We have situations where the government are now pressurising people if they don't pay. I think it's by today or maybe even yesterday. Yesterday, was it? That if they didn't pay by yesterday, they'd now be levied when they do actually come, if they have to have private health. And we have a situation, I think it was amazing, there was gasps in the audience when Constantina mentioned that I think there was a €7 charge or something to go to hospital or to go to a doctor in Greece, or €5 for to go, and we're paying 100. And by the way, I've never paid that and I won't, and nobody will take you to court either, so don't worry about that. But anyway, it says, healthcare is a human right and access to quality healthcare should not be dependent on income. The long-standing policy whereby successive governments promote and incentivise the private healthcare industry is inefficient and discriminatory against those on low incomes. The role of government should be to create a universal healthcare system free at the point of entry, which provides the highest possible level of care for all citizens, irrespective of social or economic factors. Thanks, Brendan.
Okay, well, we all know that a country with less than 1% of the population of the European Union had foisted upon it 41% of the European debt. And that is a huge, huge issue that we have heard discussed in great detail as well from our colleague from Sarisa today. So among the proposals that we're putting out for consultation on debt is that we would build alliances with progressive citizen-led movements in Europe to develop and promote alternative proposals for realistic and responsible debt reduction strategies for people across Europe. End the Irish government's inexplicable, disgraceful, but it's not in there, boycott of the UN Committee on Sovereign Debt Restructuring and begin to work, led by partners in the Global South, to develop legal mechanisms to protect citizens from the impact of financial speculation and vulture funds. And education debt is...
Thanks, Brendan. We've looked at education and we said that everyone has the right to education. The provision of education should be truly free, without the necessity for voluntary contributions up to at least primary degree level. The provision of professional and technical education should be affordable and available to all and should be equally accessible. Our three basic priorities for any new government should be: 1, to reduce the ratio of students to teachers from among the highest levels in the EU to the lowest; 2, the restoration of and increased provision of special needs assistance, which should be seen as an investment in the most vulnerable of our children; and 3, investment in early childhood education should be provided in line with a progressive childcare policy, which would facilitate the option for parents to enter the workforce. Education is an investment in the future of the nation, whereby we can develop a productive and cohesive society. More funding for the apprenticeship programme and a coordinated jobs policy promoting labour-intensive industries should form part of any future government education programme. A modern, dynamic economy is dependent on well-educated citizens, increasing employment opportunities and providing the opportunities to create new services and technologies. Thanks, Brendan.
Okay, it's clear from the public discourse that one of the big problems we have in the last few years is a disconnect between what people think or what they are told constantly is their democracy and what actually happens. So we are putting out there some ideas in terms of democratic and political reform. One of the things we are putting out for discussion is that hosting one general election every 5 years provides too large a gap for real democratic representation, particularly as there is no accountability for broken political promises subsequent to an election. So we're putting in a discussion there for everybody to have about a recall mechanism for people who break those promises. We also have a proposal... We also have a proposal in there which might seem, which don't know if you've come across it before, but we think it's something well worth discussing, about the introduction of breathalyzers ahead of votes in the Oireachtas. And that's not a joke. And that's not a joke. I can't get into my car drunk. I don't know why people think they can vote for the future of this state drunk. And in the last couple of years... on an abortion bill and also on the night of discussion on the water services bill, the behaviour of our elected representatives in the Dáil has been nothing short of an utter disgrace and national embarrassment. So it should be prohibited. Now listen, as I said at the outset, and we've had a really intense dialogue on this in the last few weeks in all sorts of ways. And as I hope we're all learning, and I would like to think there was something positive, but also something thought-provoking for every one of us, no matter where we come from. and what we do in terms of the presentations we received today. And I would like to think, and we would like to think, that we all at least know the following: that there is a huge appetite for change, there is a possible way forward, and we all, I think we all, want to see change, at least under similar headings. So this consultation process that has now been begun between now and the 13th of June can be as extensive and as inclusive as people want it to be. We are seriously looking for meetings, conversations, submissions, amendments, new proposals, new topics, new issues, because that's only a starting point. A committee has been set up to receive, on behalf of the 5 Right2Water unions, all of those submissions. On that committee is Kathleen Lynch from UCD, Michael Taft, who presented today, Stephen Nolan, who presented today, and John Bissett from Spectacle and Defiance. And, you know, some of us have been going around, I know most of you and a lot of you, particularly the political people, have spent an awful lot of time going around talking at meetings the last number of months, and I know the community people have spent an awful lot of time, practically every night of the week actually, talking in their communities and discussing for a new sort of dialogue on water, and the dialogue has gone beyond water. Some of us in the trade union movement have also done that. Hopefully over the next few weeks, we can all learn from our mistakes, and I include myself in that. We can all be humble, and we can all link arms and make this process really, really, really meaningful. So thank you all very much for attending. Can you please all make sure you give those back on the way out? And we're going off to the May Day rally. Thank you very much.